Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Joey might be Ashley's father, a rumor that arrives like a thin, bright sliver of light cutting across the polished facade of Fairmont Crest, a secret made dangerous by proximity, a truth that would rearrange loyalties and reweave histories if it were ever pulled tight enough to knot. There are small, intimate corners of the world where people keep their most dangerous truths folded and smooth. The back pocket of a jeans that has worn a warm shape around a hand, a Bible kept on a kitchen shelf where the spine is cracked from late-night confessions, a shoebox of photographs under a bed. Jan kept hers in a box like that, but the box had no label. She had always meant to burn what was inside. Instead, she tucked the box into the bottom drawer of her nightstand and learned to live in the space between the drawers closing and the lie of silence that followed. The amnesia she practiced, not about the facts themselves but about what they might do if someone else learned, became a careful choreography. She never told Ashley the who, the why. The wet smallness of the morning she realized she was carrying a life that would make her breath catch. To Jan it had been easier, cleaner, to cut the rope of that part of her own history free and sail with the survivor's stern set tight toward a calm harbor of two, mother, daughter. Ashley grew up under that canopy of careful peace and learned to love it. The gated streets of their neighborhood were wide, the grass kept manicured and trembling with sprinkler mist. The upscale plates of the Dupree socials and fundraiser galas were where Jan worked and shone. Jan had a laugh that could fill a room and a set of rules that were iron but forgiving: no lying, always pay what you owe, and never let the kind of man who breaks people past the point of return into your home. The only rule Ashley never understood was the one about the man she had never met. Every child asks about their origins, of course. Ashley asked with the kind of casual persistence that becomes its own ritual, a question left on the table like a single flower. Who was he? Why didn't you like him? Would he like me? Jan, with that soft flash of protectiveness that had kept them safe, always changed the subject. She would laugh and point to a spreadsheet, or call a neighbor, or turn the radio up, the refusal a shield that was neither cruel nor kind but resolute. That silence, however, does not soothe the mind that has the itch of missing names. Curiosity's teeth are fine and merciless. Ashley learned to pick at them. She grew into a woman who would study people like puzzles, who would notice a scar's angle behind a smile, or how a hand lingered when it should have moved away. She found herself watching men's faces as though she were searching for ancestral features, for some pattern that would fit into a picture of herself. When Jan suggested Derek, when she said, with all the fierceness of someone who had made a pact with herself to spare her child the underbelly of life, that Derek was a good man, Ashley heard both the praise and a warning braided together. Derek was the reliable sort. He carried the smell of smoke and gasoline and clean wool, the scent of someone who built things for a living and whose hands could also make tea when the night was wrong. He was a firefighter, a trade marked by courage and the quiet surrender of personal safety to a profession. He had a laugh that made children mimic him, and a calm that Jessica, Jan's oldest friend, described as wooden, in the best sense. Jan's endorsement of Derek was practical and maternal. You can have passion later, she told Ashley in one of those nights where the two of them were cleaning up the kitchen, but you need a man who will show up when the lights have gone out. Her tone was not the hollow pronouncement of a woman who had never loved. It was the weathered verdict of someone who had loved too hard and found that love hollowed out by someone else's selfishness. The wound Jan carried under her ribs had gravity. She had been married in the way that young women sometimes are when they mistake possession for partnership. The man had been the kind that everyone else smiled at and forgave for small cruelties because he had a charm that made people forget their better judgment. Her description of him to Ashley years later, in the safe rooms of memory she allowed herself, was always minimal and fierce. He was not hers. He was not for us. That phrase, repeated like a talisman, bent into a code. She had brought Ashley into a world she controlled: birthday parties with white linen and small hand-picked menus, school plays where Jan sat in the front row rubbing tears into the hem of her sleeve. A life with calendars that told the truth about stability. But Jan bore the memory of a different husband, the one who had made promises and then walked away angry, the kind who specialized in making someone feel incompetent at being who they were. For Jan, Derek represented that clean, safe alternative. Better a steady brother in arms than a charming storm. Ashley's romantic experiments, therefore, became part of an inner argument. Jan's caution against Ashley's hunger. Andre entered Ashley's orbit with the gilded ease of someone used to having people orbit him. He had money, which for a woman like Ashley who had grown up around the aesthetic of stability felt luxurious and intoxicating. He was generous with things that glittered and attention that smelled like perfume. He arrived as a feeling, warmth, possibility. A mirror held up to everything she did not yet know she wanted. There is an almost childish temptation in people who seem to offer the world as a present. Ashley, wanting to believe in the part of herself that could be loved for more than her loyalty, stepped toward that glitter. The collision then happened in the middle of an evening that began with laughter and ended with a new kind of silence. Danny, a woman with a grin and a social ease cultivated in the Dupree salons, and Andre were caught in a moment that belonged to a different language than the one Ashley had been promised. Ashley found them not by intention but by the stray foot that led her down a service corridor into a room with the heat of other people's breath. Danny's hair fell in soft waves. Andre's face was the kind that looked at someone and then wanted to keep looking. The kiss she saw was not one stolen, not a secret tryst hidden behind curtains. It was the kind of public eagerness that demanded attention, as if both wished to be found. That image, Danny's lips on Andre's hand warm at the small of her back, did something to Ashley like striking glass with a pebble. It cracked an interior vessel that no amount of Jan's counsel or Derek's steady affection could reach. The betrayal felt like smoke. It went to Ashley's lungs and made it hard to breathe. There was grief at being fooled and eclipsed, sharp anger at the audacity of being hurt in a room full of people whose manners could not parse the rawness of truth. Ashley did not handle the confrontation with the cool detachment of a soap opera heroine. She handled it with the real, jagged motion of someone who had been made small and then required to sit with the size of that wound. Danny, when confronted, adopted the same casual forthrightness she used at the country club. "It happened," Danny said, almost flippant. "It doesn't mean anything. We were both drunk." Andre, by the time Ashley found him, had the posture of an apology but the language of self-justification. "It was a mistake," he said, and then, "because greed is a persuasive dialect, I care about you." It is funny how much weight the word mistake can carry. Jan, whose life had been an ongoing attempt to make the world predictable for Ashley, had warned her about men like Andre, generous, beautiful, reckless. Jan's heart hardened into a kind of preemptive map reading. She saw the cliffs before her daughter did. When she counseled, she did so with an almost clinical severity. "You cannot build your life on someone who is an optional kindness," she told Ashley, the indignation in her voice softening into a plea. Ashley, however, had the ache of being in love with the idea of being wanted. The result was the collision of impulses, a hunger for tenderness and the shrewdness taught by Jan's survival. That tension defined many of Ashley's nights for a while. She would lie awake, fingers pressed into the mattress, and imagine a life that might be kinder than the one she knew, all while Jan's voice, "You must be careful. You must choose safe," folded into her imagination like an instruction manual for survival. Derek's injury came after this, sudden and surreal as lightning splitting a sky. A call in the middle of the afternoon, the way a small stone drops into clear water and ripples outward, transforming everything. A blaze, a rescue, a man pulled from the wreckage with his right leg uncooperative. The doctor's type of faces that held both clinical distance and the bubble of private worry. He was hospitalized in the sort of antiseptic rooms that force children to grow up within the hour. The rhythm of beeping monitors folded into Ashley's chest like a drum. The prognosis was heavy, a likelihood of long-term impairment, a possibility of losing full mobility. In those days the world narrowed to the steady press of hospital chair fabric and the soft, oxygenated voices of nurses. Derek's hands were warm and trembled when Ashley held them. He had the flush of survival underneath the pallor of trauma. Ashley thought of all the ways a person can be broken, and all the ways one can still be whole. That was the moment when Ashley realized she still loved him, not as a high, not as a desire for adrenaline like her brief romance with Andre, but as a durational, patient flame. Love revealed itself as practical stubbornness. She wanted him healthier because she had grown used to the way he breathed near her. But love also brought new cruelty of decision. How do you ask someone to fight for a life they cannot touch the same way as before? How do you be the person who suggests therapy when you yourself are trembling with fear that your suggestion will read as an unasked-for ultimatum? Derek, for his part, was not the type to ask for pity. He had always met danger with a narrow certainty of someone trained to hold the line. The physicians spoke of rehabilitation as if it were a map: steps, weights, determination. Ashley listened, then tried to translate that map into a future she could live with. Urging Derek to commit to therapy felt to Ashley like pushing a door he might choose not to open. There was the practical, the therapy schedule, the financial arrangements, the family visits. And there was the emotional, Derek's pride, the way he saw his body as the locus of worth and competence. "I'll try," Derek would sputter on the worst days, eyes fixed on a corner of the ceiling as if the plaster held some truth he needed to decode. Ashley, in those moments, felt she was arguing with a man who would rather take a bullet than a pill. The division between them on this subject was not about love. It was about control. Who gets to choose the path forward in a life that has been partially yanked from its mooring? It was during this fragile season that Ashley, blistered and sleep-deprived, began to notice things about her mother that did not fit the neat, taut narrative Jan offered. Jan, who had been the steward of calm, had begun to carry attention like a secret animal in her shoulders. She would speak on the phone late at night in halting sentences, peel off layers of composure like bandages, and once or twice she had storms behind her eyes that she tried to tuck away with a hand over her mouth and a small laugh. "It's nothing," she would say when Ashley pressed, but her hands told other stories. Sometimes they shook when she reached for a cup, sometimes they were steady in a way that said she had been practicing control for a long time. One afternoon, precisely at the point where Ashley's patience was thin from hospital rotation and reprisal memories of Andre's betrayal, she saw her mother argue. It was not an argument made with the words of neighbors and their polite disputes, but one of raw, exposed friction, the kind that flayed both participants raw. Ashley was coming back from a quick run, the kind of run designed to shake the claustrophobia out of one's chest, when she caught the end of a sentence out of the corner of the house's side window. Jan and a man she did not immediately recognize were standing near Jan's car, voices low but heated. The man's jaw was square. There was a weathered quality to him that said he had seen nights he would rather forget. He moved with the sort of comfortable arrogance that says you can believe yourself untouchable. He was, in one sweeping glance, someone who could have been the husband Jan had once described with so little affection. Ashley crept closer, pulling the curtains to the side as if the small action made her less complicit. She heard her mother's voice, not shrill, but hard, like stone dulled by ocean weather. "I told you," Jan said. "I told you not to come near her. I told you what would happen." The man answered, voice low. "You can't lock her away, Jan. A child deserves to know where they came from." Jan's reply was a single word, sharpened so that even the air around it flinched. "No." The name was said then, cut into the hush of the driveway like a knife. "Joey." The syllable landed into Ashley as a physical blow. Everything around her, the neighborhood's clipped hedges, the distant sound of a lawnmower, sharpened into a sound that might have been an old song. Her mother said Joey was the bad man of her youth. Jan's language moved from the careful avoidance she had always practiced into an acid clarity. The image of the man in the driveway folded into Ashley's mind until she saw him clearly, the cadence of his speech, the small scar at the corner of his lip. She had never known Joey's face, never had the shape of his jaw in her memory. And yet the sound of his name now rearranged her interior landscape. The question that rose in Ashley was immediate and knuckled with fear. Did Joey know? Had Joey been told, by someone, somewhere, that a woman had carried his child? Jan's voice, brittle now, landed into a sentence that felt like an accusation and a warning at once. "You were the one who left me with nothing," she said. "You cannot take what I built with her." The man's laugh was the thing of a man who had a memory like a ledger and the audacity to think himself owed. "I don't want to take her," he said. "I want to be a part of her life." Jan spat back, You don't get to decide that. There are many kinds of secrets. There are secrets kept for the sake of shame and those kept for protection. There are also secrets kept because to tell them is to invite the possibility of them becoming true. Jan believed, as many survivors do, that silence could be a shelter. If Joey remained in the dark, he could not use the truth as a weapon. If he was denied knowledge, then there was no chance he could attempt to claim what Jan had fought tooth and nail to keep. The calculus was ugly and honest. If someone you did not trust discovered the leverage of an unacknowledged paternity, they could take more than intimacy back. They could take a life's worth of planning and render it into a public spectacle. For Jan, the stakes were whether Ashley would be stripped of the home Jan had carved for them both. Ashley, crouched behind the curtain, felt the ground under her feet shift like tectonic plates. She had always wondered why Jan hesitated when the topic of fatherhood came up, why there were sudden dashes of anger and then a quick smothering of affection. She had thought Jan's secrecy was out of concern about gossip, about scarred pride. She had not thought the reason might be someone named Joey. The sound of it made her both cold and burning. Was Joey an openly existing presence that had chosen to be a quiet ghost in her life? Or was he only the echo of an old promise that Jan had buried? The idea that a man might one day step into the world and announce, "I am your father, and I will take you," shuddered through Ashley like a cold wind. She wanted to run out and confront him the way a girl might confront a bully, chest puffed out and voice bright. She wanted to rage at Jan for keeping her small, for not trusting her with the full span of her life. But she also felt the shadow of the injury Derek carried over their household, a sick, tender fossil that made any movement toward independent action feel like a betrayal of a man who needed her steady now more than ever. The question of whether to look for Joey now felt like a moral fork between wanting the truth for herself and protecting the life she had built alongside Derek, Jan, and the neighborly rituals that made up her world. Jan's voice softened toward the end of the exchange, the threat and the heat giving way into the strange soft music of a woman calculating cost. If anything happens to her, if she gets pulled from this life because you show up and make noise, I will make it my business to take you apart, she said with a clarity that made the skin on Ashley's arms prickle. There was an entire life piled into that sentence, the life Jan had fought for and the child she had created in private. The man Joey walked away with a promise that sounded like a threat. "You will regret this," he muttered, and in his walk there was both arrogance and a kind of sorrow that was not humble. Ashley did not know whether to breathe. She sat with the curtain in her hand, suddenly needing the comfort of proof documents, DNA. A photograph, as if the world could be righted by scientific fact alone. But facts are stubborn things, they can be clarifying but also fatal. She thought of the line between wanting truth and protecting the ones she loved. She thought of Jan's quiet moments, the way she cried sometimes into the sink and then scrubbed her eyes clean as if she were erasing the evidence of tears. She thought of Derek in the hospital and Andre's casual betrayal. In the high, bright cage of Fairmont Crest, the gossip would come, the neighbors would take sides and the Dupree salons would begin to taste like old news and fresh scandal. If Joey had been absent all these years, what would his return mean? Would he bring apology, or would he come with the coercive appetite of a man who believed the world owed him? Ashley made herself a small, merciless plan. She would not confront Jan that afternoon. She would watch. She would gather what she could quietly. She would ask questions at the library, search county records, imagine scenarios and rehearse them in the quiet of her closet so that if the truth came she would not be a fish gaping on land. But more than anything, she felt a need to sit with Derek. She wanted to see whether the man who might be taken from her by fate and circumstance could be anchored with care. She wanted, selfishly and fiercely, to be the woman who insisted he try, who coaxed him into the therapy room and held his hand when the hard work began. She wanted to be a person of action rather than mere reaction. So she became both patient and conspiracy, patient in hospital rooms, conspiracy in the small sleuthings she practiced after work. She called an old friend of her mother's who worked at the courthouse under the pretext of asking about property records and was rewarded with a small, thick photocopy of a marriage license from years past. The groom's name was not Joey, but a different surname that Jan had always said with a flat mouth. That was a clue. not the whole answer. She obtained, later, a whisper of a name in a final old phone log that hinted at a Joey with a Myrtle Beach exchange. Each breadcrumb fed the hunger, sometimes healing, sometimes dangerous. Jan, meanwhile, moved like someone trying to keep the ocean from pouring into a cellar. She volunteered for more events, took Ashley's shopping trips with an energy that was near manic. Sometimes, on late nights when the house had settled and the moon painted the living room in a thin, sacred light, Jan would come and sit at the foot of Ashley's bed and tell of little things, how she used to hum when she was nervous, how she had once thought the color red was a promise. It was cornered affection, and Ashley accepted it like a bomb. Yet the conversation never slipped into the open space that Joey would create if he entered. Jan kept one side of the door closed. If Joey was a danger in Jan's memory, he might also be a danger in present reality. There were questions about legality, about a man's right to seek a relationship with an adult child he may have fathered, and questions about motive. Did he come to say sorry, or did he arrive because he wanted something Jan had? If a man of influence wanted to return to a life that had long since moved on, could he take it back? The thought of someone demanding entrance into Ashley's life because he now felt entitled to it made Jan's eyes hard in a way that frightened Ashley and, in the same motion, made her curious. That night, as the house settled, as Derek's monitor beeped steady as a sentinel in Ashley's mind, she thought about the shape of identity. How much do the names we inherit weigh on what we become? What happens when the husband of a mother is not the father of her child, and the absent man returns with his own definition of family? The gated community that held them thought it had the answers: privacy, prowess, the right to police one's own narrative. But the truth, as it always does, has a way of surfacing. It comes in the form of an overheard word, a photograph found in a junk drawer, a phone call that slips through the guardrails. It makes the private public. This was where Ashley lived now, at the outer edge of a truth that was not hers alone. She felt the tug of two lives, the life Jan had carved by refusing to let the past name her daughter in public, and the life that might open if she pursued the man whose name now hung between them like a bell. She realized she could continue to live in Jan's shelter of silence, or she could force a breach and see what the world would spill forth. In the quiet, with the moonlight thin and Derek's respiration a soft metronome, Ashley made the first move of a plan she would not yet reveal to Jan. She would learn Joey's name fully. She would find him, not to allow him to claim what her mother had earned, but to understand. She wanted evidence, and then, perhaps, a choice. It felt, in that instant, like an act of treason and liberation all at once. She did not yet know what she would do with the truth when it arrived, but she felt the pull of it like tidewater. Outside the window the neighborhood was patient and unhurried, the kind of place where news traveled with the speed of slow gossip and clinked like champagne flutes in summer. Inside, in the small, vibrating heart of the house that Jan had made, a different kind of news was being born. One in which identity might be reclaimed, in which betrayal and healing might both be possible. The evening folded around Ashley like a promise or a threat, she could not tell which, and she held her mother's secret like a coal that might either warm her or burn down everything she had built.